Really delighted to have a partnership with Punjabi Community Health Services as part of this community safety and well-being project with a number of other partners as well. I'll name some of them. It's a Region of Peel funded project where we're trying to really uncover ways to improve mental wellness supports and services for international students and newcomer young adults. We are working in partnership with a number of agencies, and organizations, including the Region of Peel, Catholic Family Services, Everymind, Indus Community Services, Punjabi Community Health Services, Trillium Health Partners, Peel District School Board, Family Services of Peel, Peel Public Health, Sheridan College, Algoma University, the City of Brampton, Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board, and Services and Housing in the province, among others. So thanks for all the tremendous support that we all are putting into this. We had a wonderful forum in November. So this is a bit of a carry-on from that forum, really thinking about what training might be helpful for staff in our different organizations, whether it be in post-secondary institutions, school boards, settlement agencies, or mental health service providers as well. I'm going to be starting with a land acknowledgement, and I know that we're all functioning out of Peel for the most part, and so we're working on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and in particular wanting to acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwa, Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are the direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And also wanting to acknowledge those who arrived forcibly through the transatlantic slave trade and pay our respects and honor those from African descent as well. As I mentioned, this is a partnership with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan for Region of Peel. And we also have particular support for this session from Project Now out of Trillium Health Partners. We were hoping to have Risha Sharma, the project director from Project Now, speak a little bit about their initiative. So unfortunately, she's under the weather and unable to join us. So I'll just share a little bit about Project Now, which aims to improve access and the quality of mental health and addiction services in Ontario by helping overcome a disconnected system. I'm sure many of us can relate to the long wait times and the service gaps. So there's been an evolution for Project Now, where in 2018, the original vision and scope was to end child and youth suicides in Mississauga through cross-sectoral partnerships. And now the project, since coming out of COVID, is more focused on highlighting the strengths and gaps of the mental health and addiction system, and really pulling together various perspectives, along with the perspective of partners, including the Mississauga Ontario Health Team. And the focus that they're looking at right now is on youth, 13 to 25. So just a little bit of background, and after this session, we'll be sharing an email with a little bit of a call for participants that Project Now has for young adults as well. So we'll be sure to share that via email afterwards. So really happy to have this group come together. We're really privileged to have Buldev Mutta join us, who is the founder and former Chief Executive Officer of the Punjabi Community Health Services in Peel Region. Many of you may know Buldev from his work at PCHS since 1990, and he was instrumental in really developing the organization to be an accredited, charitable, and culturally appropriate one. He has received many community awards for his work in equity, community development, diversity management, and organizational change. He also actively delivers sessions on community competency and other topics that are indispensable in the smooth functioning of an ever-evolving diasporic community. Presently, Buldev stays active by delivering sessions on men's and women's mental health. So if you're ever looking for a trainer in more depth than this hour, then we'll have his contact information to share. And he does this with various groups. And he's also writing a book that talks about his life's journey, which includes his grandchildren that he's also learning from, I'm sure. So thank you so much, Buldev, for facilitating the discussion today and sharing some of your knowledge, experience, and wisdom. So I'm going to turn it over to you without further ado.
Uh, Thank you, Jessica, for this warm introduction. I'm really honored to be here. Just some um, overview or just some opening remarks. I absolutely do not have any doubts that you are clinically very well trained. You have wealth of experience. You are passionate in the work that you do. So this is just to build on some things that I have learned over the years. So some of you may find this refreshing, and some of you may have heard this before. But in the end, in this 1 hour, we are hoping that we will be at least able to refresh our learnings as well. So this is just one short hour. So I'm hoping to wrap this up in 25 minutes or so that we can go into discussion and then have a little bit of time left for question and answers. So as you may know that 1 hour is really not enough to dissect all the kind of intersectoral kind of issues that emerge, but we will do our best to make the best use of this 1 hour. And I really thank you, all of you, for taking the time out to be with us. And I think the underlying premise of all this is that you want to make sure that the people that come to you, that you are able to provide the best services possible. So I really thank you for taking this time to be here, and thank you to all the people who are working behind the scenes to make this possible. And I know how much time it goes in terms of deciding with all the limitations that we have. So I really commend you all for putting this together, and all the participants who have joined today. So let's quickly go through this issue. Sorry, I am just under the weather, but I just didn't want to cancel this. So please bear with me while I keep on drinking water so I don't cough too much. So culture implies the integrated pattern of human attitudes or behaviors. So if we look at our attitudes and behaviors, they are dictated by the culture that we are in. Either we are, and then we also have our family culture. It's not just the culture that we are born in, but every family has a culture. And then we are also governed by our own likes and dislikes and preferences. So the way we think, the way we communicate, the way we act upon certain things, our customs, what we wear, what we eat, how do we get married, how do we uh, do, and all of this could be influenced by the culture, but also with our with our own preferences. Whatever our beliefs and values and institutions of racial, ethnic, faith, or social group. So, in fact, every single one of us has our own culture. And sometimes in Canada and in the settlement process, we bring our culture into Canada, and then we are learning from whatever is the culture here, whatever are the laws and the behaviors and the acceptable norms, and we tweak our own culture to adjust to the Canadian way of life, whatever that means in detail. So that's what it is. So we're going to look at it. How does it influence our clinical work, and what can we do to learn from it? So, so the easiest way that I have been able to kind of know through my own journey, I have tried to learn about other people's culture, and the first thing that comes to mind is the food, the festivals, people, what clothes they wear, what are the dances. And when I used to go to other people's marriages, and I found a lot of similarities. And when I used to teach social work at Sheridan at Humber, I used to usually give out an assignment that please attend a wedding or some kind of a celebration that is not of your own culture and write an essay. What are some similarities and what are some differences? And students were awed that there are sort of many similarities in culture in terms of weddings, in terms of the songs, in terms of the celebrations. So that's the easier part. That's not the one. The difficult part under the deep culture is our communication styles and rules. So, for example, how do you make how do you look the other person in the eye is very much determined. So many cultures do not want you to look directly in the eye. They might look down. They might now be shy enough to make a contact. So. The issue that might be under this is, okay, do you if a person is not making eye contact, do we draw some conclusions from it? And unless we know why that person is not looking you in the eye, is this cultural or is this something totally different? I think we can't infer on it. And that's where the whole issue came about. Uh, there was a big article back about 30 years ago of one of the psychiatrists made a diagnosis to a woman was brought in the emergency. The psychiatrist came and he asked a couple of questions to this woman, and the woman nodded. And based on the nods, he said that she is suicidal and confined her. The next morning, an interpreter was brought in, and he said, "Well, her head nods. In the Western culture, we go like this if we say yes, but in her culture, this meant no. This meant yes." So even those kind of communication rules where we can kind of misinterpret, because 90% of the communication is non-verbal, only 10% is verbal. So you can see that as a clinical person, you are looking at the person, you're making some observations, the way they are interacting with you, and based on that, you are drawing some conclusion. Is this person depressed? Is this person sad? Is this person angry? Is this person um, looking for some extra help? Is this person having difficulty expressing verbally what he or she wants? All of these assessments that we do non-verbally has a deep rooted meaning in culture. So it will be important for us to kind of find out what does hand movements make, what does shaking of the hand mean, how close can you come to another person because making them uncomfortable. In some cultures, you can go very close. In some cultures, you have to maintain quite a bit of distance between two people. So all of these things kind of have an issue in terms of our clinical work. And then what does it mean in terms of our manners, our friendship, our leadership? In some areas, when I work within the South Asian community with elders, they would know, they intrude. They will ask me which village I come from, whether I'm married or not, whether my children are married, is there anyone not married, and all kind of intrusive questions are asked. And this is cultural because they want to first find out if I will open up, and if I open up, they will open up. So it's a very kind of cultural thing to do. Now, we can take a different stand. In the Canadian social work ethics, it is usually said that a counselor should not divulge too much personal information to the client, which is fine. I understand that. But what if the cultural part is that unless you make a disclosure, I'm not going to make a disclosure, we are going to have some difficulty in it. So think about it, how our initial rapport with a client makes a difference in terms of whether your counseling sessions will be successful or not. And the same thing comes with time. Is the time fluid in that culture, or are they strict on time? In many of the cultures, time is very fluid. 6 o'clock doesn't really mean 6 o'clock. It can be 6:30 or 7, not a big deal. So the time fluency is also dependent on culture as well, because they are just now. I can share with you quickly a story about my grandfather when I was about 8 years old, and I went to visit him in a village where he lived. And I said, Grandpa, tomorrow you told me that you're going to take me to all the other relatives. And he said, yes. I said, how far are they? He says, 70 cups away. I said, what does it mean, 70 cups away? He says, well, on the way, we're going to stop at 7 different people's homes. We're going to drink tea, wish them well, and then we're going to move on. I said, but how long it will take? He said, it doesn't matter. If somebody wants you to stay overnight, you're going to stay overnight. But I said, our purpose is to meet someone. He says, yeah, but you remember, time is fluid. And I picked on it and I said, because I was born not even in India. So I grew up in the Western. So I had a very tough time understanding the concept of 70 cups away. But you see how cultures react? They are very laxed. So it's not a big deal if you go to India and you want to deposit your check and it takes you a couple of hours because you chit chat, you talk to people in the line you are standing, and uh, do all kind of things. It's not. So the whole concept of privacy is not as strictly adhered to in some cultures as it is adhered to in Canada. Even our children become very much fascinated with the privacy and freedom and the right to speech. Don't go into my backpack kind of a thing in Canada. Whereas back home, everything belonged to everybody. So it was not a big deal about it. So when you look at those culture, our primary informational point is we are clinical people. We want to help the person. Would a knowledge of the other person's culture, behaviors, norms, attitudes, decision making make a difference in our bonding with that client to deliver effective services? That's why we want to know about their culture and nothing more and nothing less. The more you are able to tell them, okay, so you are working with a Sikh person, talk to them about Amritsar and the Golden Temple. The moment you say Golden Temple, that person will open up because that person will say, my God, this person knows the intricacies of the Sikhism. I think those are, and if you're working with a Muslim client, talk about Mecca, talk about the holy shrines. And if you're working with somebody else, talk to them about, if they're from Brazil, talk to them about the statue on a mountain. So the moment you say some of the positive things about their culture and about their identity, about their country, I think there is a window that opens up, and you're able to then kind of bond with it, right? So I'm just going to pick a few things that I would like to do. In each culture, there is a pattern of decision making. Now, in Western culture, we are empowered to make a decision. Even children are empowered to make a decision. In many of the culture, the decision making is collective. It's the family that decides what is going to happen with an individual within that family. So the person who is making the decision will usually look towards other family members for acceptance of the decision they are making. The decisions could be related to choosing a life partner, going to university, whether they are going to university in nearby, or whether they are going to a different city altogether. All those decisions are collective. So, uh, so the decision making makes a difference. So don't be surprised, don't be alarmed if person agrees in your counseling room to come on Monday for a counseling session and doesn't show up on Monday because the person went home, talked in the family, and the family decided, no, we're not going to send you there. We're going to try something totally different. So don't panic. It's not about a termination of a counseling or termination of a services. They are just exploring something other than that. So the decision making makes a lot of impact. So in our clinical work at Punjabi Community Health Services, we want the family to be included if the client wants to, because ultimately the decision making of that individual will be superseded by the decision making of the collective. So this negotiation between the individual and the collective goes a long way. So you have to kind of look at it. But in many of our mainstream agencies, Our client is our client, and family is kind of there to support us. But in our case, we want them to be in the decision making. So that's what cultural competency is all about. Recognizing that the client is unable to adhere to his or her own decision making. The next one is the rights oriented culture and the roles oriented culture. So, a culture which functions on roles, on hierarchy, on who is the head of the family, head of the religious institution, head of the cultural institution, head of the person that has some clout in the community. Those are the peoples that drive for a community. And unless we can build some inroads with those individuals, we will not be able to penetrate the community. Whereas in the Western civilization, it's all about rights. So everything has been given a right in this the democratic structure that we follow in the Western. So often cultures that are roles oriented come to Canada and they get lost. They don't know how to navigate. What does it mean that my 12-year-old has right to decide whether the medical information can be given to the mother or not? How come this is done? Because in their country or in their culture, it's the mother and the father that dictate what happens to the child, and they will make some collective decision. So rights-oriented culture takes the right of collective decision making away from people, and that's where the disconnect happens. And the other ones that I'm just gonna say is that each culture has a way of etiquettes. One of the etiquettes in the South Asian culture, and you can find some of these similarities within your own cultures who are attending this. So, for example, in the South Asian culture, if you visit my home and I ask you, would you like a cup of tea? Every South Asian person will say, no, I am okay. I just had tea a couple of hours ago. And that means, yes, it's okay to have a tea. So we have to just subtly guess that. So water will be brought to you, whether you like it or not, they will just bring it. And they will make tea whether you have said yes or no. Whereas in certain cultures, no means no. And if you said no, I don't want tea, you will never be asked again. And when my children were growing up, they had enormous amount of difficulty navigating these subtleties of the culture. So they will ask me, but uncle said, no, why are you asking us to make tea? Because that's the way it is works. But how do we know when it's really yes and really no? I said, well, you will learn when you grow up. So these are some of the complexities that we need to know. And the other one is around I just want to take, because there will be a lot of clinical people in this participants also, theory of disease. So let me talk a little bit about what does cultural competency mean at the ground level, not at the academic level, at the ground level. So you have somebody sitting in front of you and you look at their diagnosis, they bring a report to you from a psychiatrist and it says she is clinically depressed or he is clinically depressed. And then you ask the person, oh, do you know what depression is? He says, no, the psychiatrist doesn't know a damn thing about what my problem is. My problem is that somebody has given me an evil eye. So that disconnect is where cultural competency comes in, that these professionals are saying she has depression. The client is saying that she has her own identity of the problem. And how do you navigate her from where the client is at to the way that that person transitions up to depression, and then you start working on depression. That is what cultural competency is all about. We cannot say to the client, okay, oh no, so if you don't accept depression, but this is depression, there is no such thing as an evil eye, so let's move on. You will lose the client, and the client will say, this person is not sensitive, doesn't understand me at all. So when you define illness, it's very that every culture has their own subtlety around definition of an illness and the way illness comes to you. Um, the other example that I can give you is that South Asian community is one of the communities in Canada that has the lowest cancer screening rates for men and women. Now, When we dug deeper why they are not going for cancer screening, it is because of their beliefs that if something will happen to you, it will happen to you, no matter what. So it's better I don't know what my diagnosis is. I'm not going to get cancer screen. So we are trying to now subtly change this so that they can go for screening, and if they are diagnosed early on, treatment can work, and their chances of survival becomes greater. So you see, every illness in a culture has its own peculiarity about how it happens, and how do we now solve it, and what spin do we give around accepting it? The same thing around learning disabilities. God forbid that within the South Asian community you have a child that has learning disability. Parents will have enormous amount of difficulty accepting learning disability. They will say, no, our child doesn't have learning disability. You don't know what you're talking about. So how do you take your competency from those parents who are so rigid and not accepting to an acceptance? That's what cultural competency is all about. And I hope that one day we will have a lengthy kind of 4 or 5 hour presentation where I can take you down how do we break down the resistance of the client to actually seek help. It's not enough to say, well, this person has stigma, therefore they are not moving. How do you break down the stigma and move on with what cultural competency is all about? So let's look at the stages of cultural shock. So these are the 4 stages. So people come, they're very happy. And then all of a sudden they say, oh my God, we can't get a job because people are not recognizing our educational credentials. They have uncertainty and doubt. And that's where majority of the kind of issues emerge. Husband-wife conflict emerges. Children's and parents' conflicts emerge. They are having second doubts why they moved to Canada. They were well settled back home. So that's where the majority of the issues happen, and their health starts to deteriorate at the stage 2. And then after a long struggle with a lot of re-education processes, going through the bridging programs, they get the job that they wanted. Now they are adapted to Canada. And after a long time, they become accepted. My wife went through this and she remained in this part and in this part for a long time. She only accepted Canada when her first grandchild was born. Then she said, well, I can't leave my grandchild. So I guess I'm going to be a Canadian now. So imagine her journey was 40 years to become accepted to Canada. 40 years of lengthy stay in Canada where she finally accepted Canada. And her between adaptation and uncertainty and doubt, she flip-flopped. She flip-flopped back and forth, right? Between there. Her early experiences setting in 1975 were horrendous, as there was a height of racism against the South Asian community at that time. So she just has bitter memories about it. So culture shock, just it's a psychological and emotional reaction that many individuals experience when they're exposed to new and unfamiliar culture. Now, this is a typical definition, but my thing is the culture shock is experienced when your initial expectations of the host culture is totally different than what you actually do. If you were a bank manager in, let's say, because I'm from India, so I keep giving examples from India. If you are a bank manager from India and you come here and you are asked to start as a bank teller, you will go through culture shock, not because your experiences, your negative experiences to what you expected from a host culture has been so shocking. That's when you go through this culture shock, right? So we need to kind of look at it in our initial when settlement workers come and they work with clients. To what extent are they shocked? Have they overcome that shock? So that is very closely related to trauma as well. Why we have shock? We have stress of the new culture, loss and home sickness, rejection, confusion, surprise, fear, and indignation, helplessness. That's why we have culture shock. And it just, we have seen that uh, even couples who had never had a fight or disagreement back home, when they come to Canada, they end up within the husband wife in the domestic violence situations because of all this. So, components of cultural competence, and this is where I will stop because I'm looking at the watch as well. So, if you look at awareness, do you have awareness of your own culture? What do you do? How do you do it? What are some of the decision making within your own culture, or how are roles defined, and how do you communicate to your grandfather versus your father versus your mother versus your brother versus your uncles and aunties? How do you do it? And then the more you are aware, the more you can relate to other people's things as well. And then the attitude, because we all have some kind of a cultural baggage as well. So then we needed to figure it out. Okay, what is our attitude towards cultural differences? If somebody is eating total differently, how would we do it? In their culture, that might be certain foods, for example. In one culture, it could be completely taboo, and in another culture, it could be a delicacy. So, how do you navigate these things? How do you navigate many of the attitudes in different cultures that are? And are you having some respect, openness, curiosity, opportunity to discover? Do you go somewhere? Have you ever visited a Hindu mandir or a Sikh temple or a Jewish synagogue? Anything other than what your own is? Have you visited? How do they do things differently? That will make you more open and accepting. And then we talk about knowledge, cultural self-awareness. We talked here. Here is where it will come from. And then culture-specific knowledge, and socio-linguistic awareness, grasp of global issues and trends. So the more knowledge you have, the better it will be. And then we talk about cross-cultural skills, is about listening, observing, using patience and perseverance, viewing situations from other perspectives. That's something that we can kind of know have some of the personal skills that we need in order to overcome some of these cultural competence issues. There are series of lengthy presentations under awareness, attitude, knowledge, and skills that I take the clinical staff through in order to give them some scenarios as to how would they use this skill. It's easy to say listening, but it's actually very difficult when you have cross-cultural issues, when emphasis is on a different thing. So that's something that we have to do. So this is the last one. Sorry, I just wanted to share this with you. So this is how I work. So when somebody comes from the South Asian community, I understand that their dominant psyche, the way they are functioning is from a family perspective. They will include their family in the discussion. This is what they want, and their individual self is very small, but their spiritual self is bigger. So unless we can have in our clinical experiences some of the spiritual components and some of the family components in that clinical setting, you will not get the desired results for to a person who happens to from Eastern culture. And so let's look at it from the Western. So the look at the individual in the Canadian culture. Their dominant self is governed by individual. They make the decisions. They decide what to do. Right? Their spiritual is small. Their family is 30%. Right? So you look at the entire clinical tools and the assessment tools are all individual driven. So one quick example. when I was in my initial social work experience, so I came across a woman who was a domestic violence victim, and I asked her, and I know that's how I started because that's how I was trained in Canada. So I said, well, does your husband? And she says, no, my husband never does anything wrong to me. It's my mother-in-law. And I was just shocked, and I just froze for a minute. And I said, so you are a domestic violence victim within the family setting by your mother-in-law? She says, yes. She is the one who abuses me emotionally, psychologically, physically pulls my hair. So I had no clinical tool to make an assessment about her safety. So here in the Western, we would just automatically assume that if it's a domestic violence situation, it's predominantly between two people, one partner against the other. But in here, there is no guarantee. And in many of the cases that we have within the South Asian community, husbands may not be beating her up. So now what do? You have no tool. And I think that's where if I had a lot of time, I would be able to take you through how do we keep our women safe when we do not have a clinical tool that determines her whether her life will be safe or not. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with this because time's running out, and I just want to give the breakout rooms some sessions so we can have some discussion. And if you choose, maybe some other day we can have a lengthy and then I can really dissect it with some examples for the clinical people to be really culturally competent. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Baldev. I'm always so impressed listening to you and learning all from your experiences and how you frame that for us, and how we can apply that into our own practices and our own work. Um, there's going to be time for questions. I think we actually might take a moment. Are there any questions for Baldev now that we might take? Otherwise, we're planning to go into breakout rooms for discussion and talk about what does cultural competency mean to you, and what trainings might be helpful to improve one's understanding of and competence in culturally appropriate service delivery. So those are the two questions we'll be discussing in small groups, and then we'll be coming back as a large group to share back and talk more with Baldev further. So any questions to start off though from his presentation? Great. I know it's there's so many pieces to what you've shared, Baldev. So more time is obviously needed to really dive into them. But I see Ruhi has a hand up. Go ahead.
I just want to say, Sashrikal Baldevji, thank you so much for this presentation. Really, really happy to see this kind of work being done. And as a next generation of BIPOC immigrant therapist, I feel like there's a lot to learn from you, especially in terms of clinical context. We'll definitely be connecting with you, but thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. All right. Any other questions out there? There'll be opportunity as well after our breakout room discussion. So we're going to send you into breakout rooms. You might need to click the blue button to come back after about 10 to 12 minutes. So we'll let you join now. Thank you so much. So I see we have about 10 minutes, but we have a good number of groups. So I think we'll be able to share from each group. So just wondered if a first group, maybe group number one, wanted to share back on their thoughts on the two questions. What does cultural competency mean to you, and what trainings might be helpful to improve on one's understanding in that area? Does someone want to speak for group number one? Or
Jessica, who's in group one? I don't know who's in group one.
Okay, Leanne, if you want to take the floor, please
okay.
do.
Okay, so I was in the group with Marlo, and so part of our discussion, cultural competency, it's exactly what Buldev had shared in one of his slides, right? But it's also looking at how we behave, towards other cultures and even in our interactions, with people that we service in the community. So that's what we talked about, and we also talked about how cultural competency, because we mentioned that it's something that's not in curriculum, for example, in elementary schools or even in our secondary schools, right? But Marla brought up a good point. You can't really teach cultural competence, and being culturally competent, it's almost like a lived experience, and you just have to be intentional in learning about others' cultures, values, attitudes, beliefs, and the way that they live to be able to understand and be more respectful and be more empathetic towards how you provide care and services to different cultures and populations.
That's fantastic. Thanks to you both. Lots of great reflections there about being intentional. Anyone want to add to their thoughts from another group?
I can go for our group, I guess. So a big thing that was coming up in our group was kind of leaving the biases behind as part of being culturally competent, just leaving those assumptions at the door kind of thing. And in terms of training, what really came up was at a service level, how do we apply that in the kind of like the mandates and like also like Buldev was mentioning, right? Like in our training here, like the around like non-disclosures and stuff like that, right? Like how do we navigate all of those rules to provide proper care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. I think your reflection on what cultural competency is around assumptions takes some self-awareness for that too. So yeah, that's a great point. And how to navigate is definitely something that Buldev spoke about while we were in our little group as well. So anyone want to share from their group?
I can share, just building on that sort of assumption idea. So I was in a group with Shayna, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Susan. We were in a group together and we were talking about how it's really important to not, when you're trying to become culturally competent or learn about different cultures, it's really important not to put the onus and responsibility of learning on the client or on the person from that culture. But it's also a bit of a dance because it's really important to not assume things about somebody based on the culture that they appear that they're from. Within cultures, there's also subtleties and different practices and different understandings of the same concept, even if you're from the same culture. So it's kind of a little bit of a dance to really have like a baseline knowledge of what someone's culture may be, and then the intricacies within that, and being able to ask questions to them that doesn't make them feel like they're doing the work of teaching you, but really comes across as you're doing the work to understand what their culture means to them in the context that you're with them in. So that was something we spoke about as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And lots of perhaps learning around that baseline about different cultures. So maybe there's some ideas there about training opportunities just for people to learn and orient towards different cultures. Is there another group that wants to go? I'm not sure if there was another group there. Amarjeet or Jaspreet, Jasneet, Domenica. I don't know if your groups are covered, so just calling out to see if anyone else wants to share.
I can actually go. My group did go, but I wouldn't mind also sharing some more thoughts about it. So cultural competency, I feel like everyone did cover really well. But in terms of like other trainings that could be really helpful, the group talked about like having more methods shared. I think that was a great point someone had made. And doing things like, personally, I think, like, for example, having a training like this was so wonderful because you're not only talking about the maybe clinical terms of it or maybe the theories that we have behind it, but you're also giving examples that make it so much more kind of like real world experience. And it's like having Buldev have those examples for us, it really made those connections, and it made it a lot easier to actually see it in a real world moment, because all of us can say we understand these terms, we understand these concepts, but it's so different when those things are kind of applied. So more trainings like that I think would be wonderful as well. But that's my 2 cents.
Thanks so much for sharing. And just on that real world piece, it would be great to hear from the group if we do a future training, would it be in person? Would it be helpful to have maybe like role play scenarios to, you know, test out some of those real world examples and how you would approach them? So just wanting to test the waters with this group as a whole, do you have a sense of formats that might be helpful for future trainings as well? If you don't have any, oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Oh, I think something in person with role playing would be really a great tool personally. I think so. And I think it would be really awesome to have service providers or experts from like different cultures be able to come and kind of present as well. I think for me, as someone who's also Indian and Buldev, like a lot of us are South Asian in this room just from the names. So I think we have some like those, like it would be really nice to have like different perspectives and different understandings of how different cultures operate. There are a lot of South Asians in Canada and Ontario specifically, but there are also lots of other groups. And just around the training piece, Shayna brought up the idea of having more trauma-informed training, which I think was a great point. And also to have like strengths-based approaches to, or learning how to have strength-based approaches to when you're in sort of service environments with clients. I think strength-based approaches just creates better rapport earlier on. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm seeing some nods as well. So agreement on those points. We have an evaluation form as well. So if you have other thoughts that you'd like to share, we're just going to put that in the chat box, the link, and we'll also share it by email afterwards. So it would be great to get your feedback through that survey as well. I just want to really thank Buldev ji for your wonderful presentation and sharing your insights and expertise. I think it really resonated, and especially under the weather. So I know we're all kind of fighting different things with the weather changing constantly. And thank you everyone for joining. It's just really wonderful for us to interact and continue the momentum of our connections. So we'll be sure to follow up by email. And if you're interested in providing some input on the training development through this project, feel free to reach out through the survey, maybe add your email. And also there's a video series being developed by the Peel District School Board, as well as some college representation there as well. So if you'd like to be a part of either of those initiatives, feel free to reach out to us. And we'll be loving to have your involvement. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day too.